Commander Hyunwoo pressed his six-fingered hands against the cold metal of the command console. His yellow eyes, adapted for seeing in the eternal darkness of space, reflected the red warning lights that had been flashing for what felt like forever. The tactical display showed the same story it had been telling for 800,000 years. Another battle, another stalemate, another pointless waste of life. The Corvani hegemony had been fighting the Zephyrian collective for so long that entire civilizations had risen and fallen in the time it took for a single campaign to complete. Hyunwoo remembered his grandfather telling stories about the great victories of old, but those stories sounded exactly like the ones his great-grandfather had told, and his great-great-grandfather before him. The same battles, fought over the same territories with the same predictable outcomes. Around his flagship, the debris of countless wars drifted like a graveyard of metal and dreams. Broken hull pieces from ships that had been state-of-the-art technology 50,000 years ago, bumped gently against wreckage from battles fought just yesterday. Some of the debris fields were so old that new asteroids had formed from the compressed metal and organic matter of long-dead crews. The latest engagement had started 3 months ago, when a Zephyrian patrol entered what the Corvani considered their space near the outer rim. It was the same kind of territorial dispute that had sparked 10 million conflicts before it. Both sides had mobilized their fleets, positioned them in the traditional formations, and begun the elaborate dance of destruction that had become as natural as breathing. Hyunwoo's tactical officer, a young Corvani named Saltek, had actually fallen asleep during the battle. That's how predictable it had become. The Zephyrians would advance in their diamond formation. The Corvani would respond with their crescent pattern. Both sides would exchange fire for exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, then withdraw to repair and regroup. Tomorrow they would do it again. The war had consumed everything. Entire star systems that once housed billions of beings now existed only to produce weapons and soldiers. Beautiful garden worlds had been stripped bare to build more warships. Ancient libraries containing the wisdom of 1 million species had been turned into ammunition factories. Children were born into military academies and died on battlefields without ever seeing a peaceful sunrise. What made it worse was that nobody could remember why they were fighting anymore. The original cause of the war had been lost somewhere, in the first 100,000 years. Some said it started over mining rights to a planet that no longer existed. Others claimed it began when a Zephyrian diplomat insulted a Corvani ambassador at a peace conference. The truth had been buried under so many layers of revenge and counter-revenge that it no longer mattered. Both sides had become perfect war machines. Their entire cultures revolved around military service. Their art celebrated battle, their music glorified sacrifice, and their literature spoke only of honor found in death. They had forgotten how to create anything that wasn't designed to destroy their enemies. The economy of both empires ran on a simple principle: produce enough weapons to match whatever the other side was building. If the Zephyrians built 1,000 new fighters, the Corvani would build 1,001. If the Corvani developed a new type of shield, the Zephyrians would create a weapon to penetrate it. This arms race had continued for so long that both sides were now using technology that was barely more advanced than what they had 800 millennia ago, because all innovation went toward matching their enemy rather than actually improving their lives. Hyunwoo often wondered what the galaxy might have looked like if his people had spent those 800,000 years exploring instead of fighting. They could have mapped every star, contacted every species, maybe even found ways to travel to other galaxies. Instead, they had spent nearly 1 million years perfecting the art of killing each other in the most efficient ways possible. When the sensor array picked up new ships approaching the battlefield, Hyunwoo barely looked up from his reports. Another minor species, probably. Some small civilization that had finally developed space travel and was now seeking protection from one of the major powers. It happened every few decades. These newcomers would pledge allegiance to either the Corvani or the Zephyrians, contribute a few ships to the endless war effort, and eventually be forgotten when their worlds were inevitably caught in the crossfire. But something was different about these ships. They weren't running away from the battle like most newcomers did. They weren't immediately broadcasting surrender messages or requests for alliance. Instead, they seemed to be studying the situation, watching both fleets with what almost looked like curiosity rather than fear. Hyunwoo felt a strange sensation he hadn't experienced in centuries, genuine surprise. After 800,000 years of predictable war, something unexpected was finally happening. Captain Jin'e had seen many strange things during her 15 years exploring the outer edges of known space, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing now. The bridge of the New Dawn hummed with quiet tension as her crew watched two massive alien fleets tear each other apart in what should have been a devastating battle. Instead, it looked almost like a carefully choreographed performance. The alien ships were enormous, easily 10 times the size of anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls gleamed with exotic metals that seemed to shift colors in the starlight, and their weapons discharged beams of energy so bright they left afterimages on the viewing screens. Yet despite all this impressive technology and obvious firepower, something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire engagement. Lieutenant Dong Hyun, her tactical officer, had been running combat analysis since they dropped out of hyperspace. He was young for his position, barely 30, but he had an eye for patterns that had saved their lives more than once during their exploration missions. Now his face was scrunched up in concentration as he studied the alien battle formations. "Captain, this doesn't make sense," he said, pulling up a holographic display that showed the movement patterns of both fleets. "Look at this. Every time the blue ships advance, the red ships pull back to exactly the same distance. When the red ships attack, the blue ones retreat to predetermined positions. It's like they're following a script." Communications Officer Park Min-ho had been trying to decode the alien transmissions since they arrived. The Babel fish translators were working overtime, slowly piecing together meaning from the strange languages. "Captain, I'm picking up their communications. Both sides are using formal military protocols that sound like they were written centuries ago. They're not adapting their tactics at all." Jin'e moved closer to the main view screen, watching as a squadron of sleek blue fighters engaged a formation of angular red interceptors. The dogfight looked spectacular, with ships spinning and diving through clouds of debris. But she noticed that despite all the fancy maneuvering, very few ships were actually being destroyed. It was as if both sides were more interested in putting on a show than achieving victory. "Scan for casualties," she ordered. Dong Hyun worked his console for several minutes before looking up with a puzzled expression. "That's impossible, Captain. Based on the firepower being exchanged, we should be seeing massive destruction, but casualty rates are incredibly low. It's like they're deliberately missing their targets." The revelation hit Jin'e like a cold wave. These two civilizations weren't really trying to win their war. They were going through the motions, following ancient patterns that had lost all meaning. She had studied military history at the academy, and this reminded her of the ritual combat practiced by some ancient Earth cultures, where the ceremony was more important than the outcome. Suddenly, both alien fleets seemed to notice the human ship. The New Dawn was tiny compared to the massive warships surrounding them, but their sudden appearance had clearly caused some confusion. Jin'e watched as several ships from both fleets broke formation and began approaching their position. "Incoming. Transmission," Minho announced. "Actually, make that 2 transmissions. Both fleets are trying to contact us simultaneously." The main screen split, showing 2 very different alien faces. On the left was a creature with yellowish skin, 4 arms, and eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light. On the right was something that looked more like a living crystal formation, with geometric patterns that shifted and pulsed as it communicated. Both aliens began speaking at the same time, their words overlapping in a chaos of demands and offers. The 4-armed creature, which Jin'e assumed belonged to the Red Fleet, was insisting that the humans surrender immediately and place themselves under Corvani protection. Meanwhile, the crystal being from the Blue Fleet was offering the humans membership in something called the Zephyrian Collective, with promises of shared knowledge and resources. What struck Jin'e most was how routine both offers sounded. These weren't desperate pleas from civilizations locked in mortal combat. They were recruitment speeches that had probably been given thousands of times before to other species caught in the middle of this eternal conflict. For a moment, Jin'e felt overwhelmed by the situation. Here was humanity's first contact with advanced alien civilizations, and they had stumbled into the middle of what appeared to be the galaxy's longest-running war. Every protocol suggested that she should either flee immediately or choose the stronger side and hope for protection. But something rebellious stirred in Jin'e's chest. She thought about all the exploration missions that had brought her to this moment, all the peaceful, first contacts humanity had dreamed of making, all the hope that they might find wisdom and friendship among the stars. Instead, they had found two ancient enemies so locked in their patterns of conflict that they couldn't even imagine another way. "Cut transmission to both fleets," she ordered. Her bridge crew looked at her in surprise. Minho's hand hovered over his console. "Captain, they're both demanding an immediate response." "I know." Jin'e straightened her uniform and took a deep breath. "Open a channel to both flagships simultaneously. I want to address both of their commanders at the same time." The communications array sparked to life, and suddenly Jin'e found herself staring at both alien commanders, who seemed just as surprised to see each other on the same channel as they were to see her. Neither had expected a three-way conversation. "I am Captain Jin'e of the human vessel." "New dawn," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. "I formally request that both of your fleets cease hostilities immediately, so that we can establish proper diplomatic contact." The silence that followed was deafening. Both alien commanders stared at her with expressions that seemed to cycle through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been curiosity. In 800,000 years of war, no one had ever asked them to simply stop fighting so they could talk. Ambassador Minho had negotiated trade deals with 17 different human colonies, helped resolve 3 border disputes, and once talked down a mining corporation from starting a war over asteroid rights. But nothing in his 20-year diplomatic career had prepared him for what he was witnessing aboard the hastily constructed neutral meeting station. The station itself was a marvel of quick engineering, built in just 6 weeks by teams from all 3 species working together. It floated in empty space, exactly halfway between the 2 alien fleets, designed with separate docking bays and living quarters to accommodate the very different needs of humans, Corvani, and Zephyrians. The human sections felt cramped compared to the soaring chambers built for the 4-armed Corvani, while the Zephyrian areas hummed with electromagnetic fields that made Minho's teeth ache. Dr. Yunji sat beside him at the curved negotiating table, her tablet filled with notes that grew more disturbing by the hour. As humanity's leading expert on alien psychology, she had volunteered for this mission despite having no actual aliens to study until now. Her theories were being tested in the most dramatic way possible. Across from them sat the alien delegations. The Corvani were represented by General Val Kess, whose scarred yellow skin told the story of countless battles. His forearms moved in constant, restless patterns that Yunji had identified as a sign of deep agitation. The Zephyrians had sent Consciousness Fragment 7742, a being that looked like a living sculpture made of blue crystal, whose faceted surfaces reflected the room's lights in hypnotic patterns. For 3 days, Minho had listened to both sides present their cases for why the war must continue. The Corvani spoke passionately about territorial honor, about ancient boundaries that had to be defended, about the sacred duty passed down through 800,000 years of military tradition. General Val Kess would pound the table with all 4 fists when describing Zephyrian violations of space that his people considered rightfully theirs. The Zephyrians were more analytical in their approach. Consciousness Fragment 7742 would project holographic displays showing resource distribution charts, population density maps, and complex mathematical formulas that supposedly proved their right to certain star systems. They spoke of efficiency, of the logical distribution of galactic resources, of the need to prevent chaos through ordered expansion. But when Minho asked the simple question that had been bothering him since the negotiations began, both sides fell silent. Why did this war start? He had asked on the second day. General Val Kess had sputtered about ancient grievances and historic injustices. Consciousness Fragment 7742 had displayed charts showing resource conflicts from millennia past, but neither could give him a straight answer. The more they talked, the more obvious it became that the original cause of their conflict had been lost somewhere in the mists of time. 800,000 years, Dr. Yunji whispered to Minho during a break in the proceedings. That's longer than modern humans have existed. These species have been fighting for so long that they have evolved their entire civilizations around it. Minho nodded, watching as the alien delegates retreated to their separate chambers. Even during breaks, they couldn't be in the same room without supervision. The hatred between them seemed automatic, reflexive, like breathing. Dr. Yunji had been studying their languages, and what she discovered was even more troubling. Minho, you need to see this, she said, pulling up her linguistic analysis. The Corvani language has over 300 words for different types of military victory, but only one word that roughly translates to peace, and it literally means temporary cessation of hostilities. What about the Zephyrians? Worse. Their collective consciousness doesn't even have a concept that matches our word compromise. The closest translation is strategic delay of optimal solution. They literally cannot imagine a situation where both sides might give up something to gain something else. This explained why Minho's attempts at traditional diplomacy were failing so badly. When he suggested that both sides could share access to disputed mining systems, General Valkes had accused him of trying to trick the Corvani into surrender. When he proposed rotating territorial control based on seasonal cycles, Consciousness Fragment 7742 had calculated that such inefficiency would reduce galactic productivity by 0.003%, which was apparently unacceptable. The breakthrough came during the fourth day of negotiations. Minho had been trying to understand how two species could sustain a war for so long without completely destroying each other. The answer, when it finally emerged, was both simple and heartbreaking. "Tell me about your homeworlds," Minho asked, during what was supposed to be a discussion of ceasefire terms. For the first time since negotiations began, both alien delegates seemed to relax slightly. General Valkes spoke of Corvin Prime, a world of towering crystal cities and floating gardens, where art and philosophy had once flourished alongside military prowess. Consciousness, Fragment 7742, shared memories of the original Zephyrian homeworld, where individual consciousness had first learned to merge into collective thought, creating beauty that transcended anything a single mind could imagine. "When did you last see these places?" Dr. Yunji asked gently. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, General Valkes admitted that Corvin Prime had been evacuated 300,000 years ago when it became too strategically valuable to risk. The entire population had been relocated to military space stations and factory worlds. Consciousness Fragment 7742 revealed that the original Zephyrian homeworld had been converted into a massive weapons manufacturing facility so long ago that no living Zephyrian had ever seen it as anything else. "You've been fighting so long that you've forgotten what you're fighting for," Minho said quietly. Dr. Yunji leaned forward. "Your entire cultures have become the war. Your children are born into military service. Your artists create war songs. Your engineers design only weapons. Your philosophers debate only military strategy. You've turned yourselves into perfect war machines, but you've forgotten how to be anything else." Both aliens stared at the humans with expressions that cycled through confusion, denial, and something that might have been recognition. The truth was too large and too terrible to accept all at once, but it was there, hanging in the recycled air of the neutral station like a presence that could no longer be ignored. For 800,000 years, two great civilizations had been locked in a dance of mutual destruction, each move perfectly choreographed, each step leading inevitably to the next. They had become so good at war that they had forgotten the point of victory was supposed to be peace. Chief Negotiator So Young stared at the holographic display showing casualty reports from the latest skirmish between Corvani and Zephyrian forces. 3,000 dead in a battle that had accomplished absolutely nothing except maintaining the status quo that had existed for 800 millennia. She rubbed her tired eyes and turned to her team of human advisors, who had been working around the clock for weeks trying to find a solution that neither alien species seemed capable of imagining. "What if we're approaching this all wrong?" So Young said suddenly. causing her colleagues to look up from their data tablets. We keep trying to make them stop fighting, but what if fighting is what they need? What if we just change how they fight? The idea that would reshape galactic civilization started with So-Young remembering her childhood. She had grown up in Seoul during the renaissance of traditional Korean martial arts, where competitions allowed fighters to test their skills without actually trying to kill each other. The concept seemed obvious to humans, but to species that had known only total war for nearly 1,000,000 years, it was completely revolutionary. She called an emergency session with both alien delegations. General Valkes arrived with his usual entourage of battle-scarred officers, while consciousness fragment 7742 materialized with several sub-fragments to provide collective analysis. Both sides expected another futile attempt at traditional peace negotiations. Instead, So-Young activated a holographic sports arena. "What is this?" General Valkes demanded, his forearms crossing in obvious suspicion. "Competition without death," So-Young explained simply. "On Earth, our warriors test their skills against each other all the time. Boxing, martial arts, strategic games, military exercises. They compete. They win and lose. They prove their honor and skill. And then they go home to their families." The concept left both alien delegations staring in bewilderment. Consciousness Fragment 7742's crystal surfaces flickered rapidly as it processed this information. "You fight without the objective of eliminating your opponent? This serves what purpose?" "The same purpose your war serves," So-Young replied. "Testing strength, proving skill, earning honor, advancing your military capabilities. But without the massive resource drain, the endless casualties, and the destruction of entire civilizations." She began explaining human military traditions that had evolved over thousands of years. War games where armies maneuvered against each other using simulation technology, naval exercises where fleets competed to achieve objectives without actually firing weapons, air shows where pilots demonstrated incredible skill and courage for the honor of their nations. "You could maintain your military cultures," So-Young continued, "your warrior traditions, your competitive spirits, but instead of destroying each other, you could compete to see who can build the most impressive space stations, who can terraform dead worlds more efficiently, who can develop better technology for exploration." General Valkes slammed one of his fists on the table. "This is not war, this is children playing games." But So-Young noticed that his other 3 hands were drumming thoughtfully on the table surface. Behind his automatic rejection, she could see curiosity. Colonel Jae-min, who had been quietly observing the negotiations, stepped forward. As a career military officer who had served in 3 different conflicts, he understood the warrior mindset better than most of the diplomatic team. He had specifically requested assignment to this mission because he recognized something in the alien military officers that reminded him of his own soldiers. "General," Jae-min said respectfully, "may I speak with you privately? Soldier to soldier?" The private meeting took place in one of the station's observation lounges, where both men could look out at the stars while they talked. Jae-min had spent hours studying Corvani military traditions and found parallels with human concepts of honor that transcended the differences between their species. "I've read about your ancient heroes," Jae-min began. "Commander Thakvel, who sacrificed his fleet to save a civilian convoy. General Morkes, who shared his rations with captured enemies during the siege of Veltar. These weren't acts of weakness. They were demonstrations of true strength." General Valkes nodded slowly. "The old stories speak of honor beyond mere victory." "Those stories still matter," Jae-min continued. "But somewhere in 800,000 years of war, you've lost sight of what honor really means. Honor isn't about killing your enemies. It's about being worthy of respect, even from your enemies." Meanwhile, So-Young was working with younger officers from both fleets, finding them more receptive to new ideas than their commanders. Lieutenant Jack 10 of the Corvani had grown up hearing his grandmother's stories about life before the war, when Corvani artists created sculptures that could make people weep with beauty. Subfragment 2847 of the Zephyrians possessed inherited memories of collective consciousness, creating music that resonated across entire star systems. These younger aliens were tired in a way their elders couldn't acknowledge. They had been born into a war that had no meaning, trained for battles that accomplished nothing and expected to die for causes that no one could clearly explain. When humans offered them alternatives, they listened with an eagerness that surprised everyone. The first breakthrough came when So Young proposed a limited prisoner exchange. Both sides had been holding captured enemies for decades, neither willing to execute them nor able to justify releasing them. The humans suggested treating prisoners with medical care and dignity, then exchanging them during brief ceasefires. General Valkes initially refused, claiming it would show weakness. But when human medics treated wounded Corvani soldiers with the same care they gave to injured Zephyrians, something shifted in his thinking. Honor, he began to realize, might include mercy. The humanitarian missions started small. Human medical teams requested permission to treat civilian populations caught in war zones. Both alien governments agreed, thinking it would demonstrate their superiority by showing how magnanimous they could be. Instead, something unexpected happened. Corvani and Zephyrian medical staff began working alongside human doctors. At first, they maintained strict separation, but the practical demands of saving lives gradually broke down barriers that military protocol had maintained for millennia. A Corvani surgeon found himself teaching a Zephyrian medic how to treat a rare injury. A Zephyrian engineer showed Corvani technicians how to repair damaged life support systems more efficiently. For the first time in 800,000 years, members of both species were cooperating instead of competing. They discovered that they actually respected each other's skills and capabilities. The Corvani admired Zephyrian precision and collective problem-solving. The Zephyrians were impressed by Corvani individual creativity and adaptability. The real change came when both species began to see the true cost of their eternal war. Human relief workers documented the devastation on worlds that had been fought over for millennia. Entire ecosystems had been destroyed, beautiful cities reduced to rubble, and billions of people living in conditions that would have been considered barbaric by the standards of either empire during peacetime. Young officers from both sides volunteered for the humanitarian missions, working together to rebuild schools, hospitals, and basic infrastructure. They discovered that construction could be just as challenging and rewarding as destruction, requiring skill, courage, and teamwork. More importantly, they began to see each other as people rather than enemies. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Old hatreds died hard, and there were setbacks and conflicts along the way. But for the first time in nearly 1,000,000 years, both the Corvani hegemony and Zephyrian collective had a vision of something beyond endless war. They began to imagine a future where their children might know peace. The signing ceremony aboard the diplomatic station New Sol was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Ambassador Sujin watched nervously as representatives from both the Corvani hegemony and Zephyrian collective approached the ceremonial table where the treaty documents waited. 3 years of careful negotiations had led to this moment, but she knew that centuries of mistrust could still derail everything at the last second. General Valkes had polished his ceremonial armor until it gleamed like starlight. His 4 hands moved with practiced precision as he reviewed the treaty terms. One final time. Beside him, consciousness fragment 7742 pulsed with soft blue light, its crystalline form reflecting the hopes and fears of billions of Zephyrian minds connected across space. The treaty itself was a masterpiece of diplomatic compromise. Rather than demanding that either species abandon their fundamental nature, it channeled their competitive instincts into constructive pursuits. The Corvani would maintain their warrior culture, but their battles would be fought in simulation chambers and training grounds. The Zephyrians could continue their drive for efficiency and expansion, but through exploration and terraforming rather than conquest. What made the treaty truly revolutionary was its framework for ongoing cooperation. Instead of simply ending the war, it created structures that would prevent future conflicts while allowing both species to maintain their dignity and cultural identity. The Galactic Cooperation Council would oversee joint projects, mediate disputes, and coordinate resource sharing across all inhabited systems. Sujin had spent months crafting the language of the treaty, working with linguists from all 3 species to ensure that every clause carried the same meaning in Corvani, Zephyrian, and human languages. The most challenging part had been translating concepts like mutual benefit and shared prosperity into languages that had evolved around zero-sum competition. The signing itself was deliberately simple. No elaborate ceremonies or grand speeches that might create opportunities for misunderstanding. General Valquez signed first, using all four hands simultaneously in a gesture that symbolized total commitment. Consciousness Fragment 7742 impressed its crystalline signature into the quantum-encrypted document, representing the unified will of the collective. Finally, Sujin added her own signature as humanity's representative and the treaty's primary architect. The real transformation began in the weeks that followed. Both alien species threw themselves into their new roles with the same intensity they had once devoted to warfare. The Corvani military academies were restructured to train officers in disaster relief, exploration, and infrastructure development. Zephyrian war fleets were reconfigured as construction armadas capable of building space stations and planetary installations with unprecedented speed and efficiency. The first joint project was both symbolic and practical. The Kepler Nebula, a region of space that had been devastated by 800,000 years of warfare, was selected for complete restoration. Corvani engineering teams worked alongside Zephyrian collective consciousness groups to clear debris fields, neutralize radiation hazards, and begin the long process of rebuilding what war had destroyed. Captain Jin A, now commanding a joint human-alien exploration fleet, led the survey missions that mapped the extent of the damage. What they found was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Entire star systems had been reduced to asteroid fields, but the basic materials for rebuilding were all there, waiting for the right combination of technology and determination. The competition between Corvani and Zephyrian work crews became legendary throughout the galaxy. They raced to see who could clear debris faster, who could construct more efficient habitats, who could restore dead worlds to life more quickly. But instead of the destructive competition that had defined their relationship for millennia, this was creative rivalry that benefited everyone involved. Young officers from both species began serving together on mixed crews, sharing techniques and perspectives that had been kept separate by centuries of conflict. A Corvani engineer might spend months learning Zephyrian collective problem-solving methods, while a Zephyrian technician would study individual creative approaches pioneered by Corvani innovators. The most dramatic changes were happening on the worlds that had been caught in the crossfire of the ancient war. Planets that had been strip-mined for military resources were being transformed into garden worlds. Refugee populations that had lived in military camps for generations were finally able to return to normal lives, building cities and raising families in peace. Ambassador Sujin found herself busier than ever as the permanent mediator of the Galactic Cooperation Council. Her role wasn't to rule over the two alien species, but to help them communicate when their different approaches to problem-solving created friction. Humans had become the galaxy's diplomatic specialist not because they were stronger or smarter than the other species, but because they had maintained the cultural memory of how to resolve conflicts without violence. The exploration races became the new frontier of interspecies competition. Corvani and Zephyrian survey fleets raced to map uncharted regions of the galaxy, competing to discover new worlds, new species, and new resources. But the rules of engagement had changed completely. Instead of conquering what they found, both species worked together to establish peaceful contact with newly discovered civilizations. The joint research stations represented perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. Corvani individual creativity combined with Zephyrian collective analysis produced scientific breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. Technologies that had been developed for warfare were adapted for peaceful purposes. Weapons systems became construction tools. Military shields were used to protect terraforming operations. Battle computers were reprogrammed to coordinate rescue missions. Captain Jin A stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the construction of the Peace Monument in the heart of the former war zone. The massive structure was being built jointly by both species, with each contributing their greatest artistic and engineering talents. Corvani sculptors carved flowing forms that seemed to dance among the stars, while Zephyrian architects created geometric patterns that resonated with mathematical beauty. The monument would serve as a reminder of what the galaxy had lost during 800,000 years of pointless conflict, but also as a symbol of what could be achieved when that same energy was directed toward creation instead of destruction. Children from both species would grow up seeing it as they traveled between worlds, learning that cooperation was not only possible, but infinitely more rewarding than conquest. As Jin-A watched Corvani and Zephyrian workers laboring side by side, sharing techniques and tools that had once been military secrets, she realized that humanity had given the galaxy something more precious than advanced technology or military might. They had given it hope. The age of endless war was finally over, and the age of unlimited possibility had begun.